Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here with an autumn card made with spring stamps. This was meant to be my project for the Marvelous Monday Crafting Crew collab this week, but I didn't manage to get it done in time. I figured I'd share it today instead now that I have it ready. So as I said, it's going to be an autumn themed card, but with a spring stamp set. This is the Spring to Go stamp set by Unity. I have stamped it onto a piece of Kraft cardstock with tea dye distress ink because initially I wanted a no line colouring kind of look, although I did later change my mind about that. So that's why I like to always leave my stamps in my MISTI, because then I can always restamp things if needed. Once I had the image stamped out, I wanted to obviously colour everything in. I'm using my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers. These are what I do my alcohol marker colouring with. And I'm colouring first the cup portion of the cup. And I wanted this to be a kind of orangey red colour. I only have one red Spectrum Noir marker. So for my shadows, I underpainted with some reddish browns, and that works very nicely for adding a bit of shading. Purples could also work depending on the kind of red you are going for here. And also greens can work to underpaint red and add more shade because it's complementary. Just a case of experimenting and finding out what works for what you're looking for. Next, I moved on to the lid and the very base of the cup, as well as the sleeve, and I'm using kind of peachy colours for this. They're not going to show up as peach as such because of the colour of the cardstock. I was kind of just experimenting. If you're going to do a lot of colouring on coloured cardstock, it's a good idea to print out your hex chart or swatch charts, whatever you use to keep track of your colours, onto the same coloured cardstock, because then you're going to know exactly how those colours are going to show up. Lighter colours particularly may not show up how you would expect them to, but for example the red does still look quite red. Next I'm going to move on to colouring the floral arrangement, and I will start with the leaves. You may have already noticed that in some places I've gone over the lines a bit, particularly on the top of that sleeve. I'm still wearing my wrist brace most of the time because my hand and wrist is still giving me trouble, and it does make colouring a bit difficult at times. I also have to take breaks because it gets painful if I spend too much time doing it, which is why it's a little bit messier than I would have preferred, but nothing too terrible, so I think I'll cope with it. And again, you can see the colours I'm using on screen as I am colouring. I do try to put all my caps into view. You may have noticed I have a piece of scrap paper sitting beneath my panel. This is so that the ink that's going through the card is going to get absorbed there, because my craft mat is slick. If any ink got through that and then I moved the panel, it could soak up from behind and make a mess, which I have had happen in the past, so I do try to make sure I always have that absorbent scrap paper behind whatever I'm colouring with my markers. For the flowers, I wanted to go a kind of corally colour, and I don't have any really coral colours in my markers, so I tried mixing pinks and oranges. I was trying to keep them quite light, but as I said, being on coloured cardstock, and they weren't showing up as much as I wanted. So I did end up going back over it again and again with multiple colours, trying to change it up and get what I was looking for. And I realised after a while I really needed to go scary dark, as Courtney Krieber said, to get it to show up properly. And I did find that I had a bit more success once I started doing that. At this point I thought I might be finished, so I started going in with some shadow to ground the image. This looks darker at first because the alcohol marker is making the panel wet, but when it dries up it looks much softer. I had thought I was done with my colouring there, but I later changed my mind. I wanted the cup itself to be more of an orangey red, as I mentioned earlier, so I did glaze over it with a couple of oranges to try and achieve that. It's actually still a bit redder than I was going for, but I think it is better than it initially was. I also realised once everything had dried back a bit that there wasn't as much contrast as I was hoping for on the image. and contrast is really what's going to make it pop. So I'm going to add in some darker colours in several areas to try and pop up that contrast. For the greens, I actually brought in some blue as my darker colour to really try and enhance that, and in fact I think I come back in later with an even darker blue. I bring in the warm beige colour to enhance the sleeve and the lid of the coffee cup and make those even darker on the edges. And whilst my shading is mostly on the left hand side, because this is a rounded object, you do want some shading on the right hand side as well, because that helps give that rounded look. And you can see how I'm going in and just blending out each colour as I go. Here is where I bring in that even darker blue, and you can see how that helps bring out the depth of those shadows on the leaves, and then I will blend it back out with the same greens I'd used earlier, and I think that's really helping them to pop already. But now the flowers are getting lost, so I thought I would bring in a darker colour there again. I grabbed the wrong colour though. This is the red that I'd used on my coffee cup, and I was actually trying to go for the AP3, the dark antique pink. So yeah, they were a bit more intense than I'd intended, but it worked out in the end. I used the tip to tip method with the flame red and the antique pink to try and deepen up that flower as well. And this is when I decided I really needed to put the lines back in, because those little flowers in particular were getting quite lost. So I put the card base back in my MISTI. Because this stamp is a red rubber stamp, I don't have the cushion in my MISTI. And then I'm just going to use cocoa ink from Hero Arts to stamp the image. This is a nice dark brown, so it's almost but not quite black. It's a bit softer than going black, and I thought that worked really nicely. So I did notice I'd got some red on the very edge of my panel, but that's okay because I'd initially cut this to A2 size, and I knew all along that I actually would want it to be slightly smaller than A2. So I'm just going to trim just a slither off of that left hand side and also off of the bottom, and this will make it slightly smaller than my card base. Before adding to the card base, I thought I still needed to get more contrast on those images. Now earlier I'd been trying to achieve this by adding more darks, but going too dark is just going to make it flat. There's only so deep you can make the shadows. You really need to have the contrast of the highlights for everything to pop. So I bought in a white Caran d'Ache pencil, and I'm just adding highlights everywhere with this to the arrangement and also onto the coffee cup itself. You could use a white gel pen, but I felt like the softness of the pencil worked better here. Having finally reached a place I was happy with on my colouring, I was ready to adhere my panel to a card base. I decided to use a white card base for this, and I've put double-sided tape all over the back of my panel, and then I will position my panel onto that white card base, and once it's straight, just remove the last backing from the double-sided tape and press it into place. I think I have about an 1/8 or a 1/16 of an inch around the edges. As I said, I made this a few days ago. I can't remember exactly what the sizings were off the top of my head, but you can really do as much of a border as you prefer. To finish the card off, I bought in these glitter dots from Love from Lizi. These were from one of her previous card kits, and these are in a light brown and they have a kind of greenish glitter in them, and I thought they worked really nicely with the colours on my card. I was thinking of just having 2, but I decided I would prefer actually to have a 3rd one as well, and these are the largest of the sizes. There's 3 size options, and I went for the largest ones, and I did have to kind of wiggle it around a bit trying to get them exactly where I wanted them. And once they were in position, that completed my card. So I hope you enjoyed this video on using spring stamps to make autumn cards. Really, the important thing there is the colour scheme. You could colour it up to be whatever season you wanted. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. I'd love to know if you've tried using your alcohol markers on coloured cardstock before and how you found doing that. If you liked this video, please do press the like button. There are a couple of other videos showing on screen now if you'd like to see more from me straight away, and you can also subscribe by clicking the button there as well. Otherwise, I'll thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!